How has the office market rebounded? Because a couple of years ago, when the recession was there, it was tough for the office market.
It's gotten a lot stronger if you have the kind of space that tenants are looking for, which is, in our case, full floor, but not 30, 40,000 feet, full floor presences for companies that want to have a Midtown office or an Upper East Side office. Or in the case of our building in Queens, in Forest Hills Tower, we have 21,000 foot plates, which actually works very well. FEMA. Which actually works very well. The office market about 2 years ago was very challenged because of all the uncertainty in the world. Now it seems as if a lot of the people who are on the sidelines are locking in. They want to lock in the rates now while the rents are still reasonable and they can get a tenant improvement allowance and they can get some concessions from the landlord. And conservative landlords are being smart and saying, wow, I could lock in a really good credit tenant for 10 or 15 years. That's what we're saying. So I'll give up $3, $4, $5 a foot in rent, even though I think the market's going up. We'll lock in the good tenants for 10 to 15 years, and we'll refinance the building, or we'll just continue on the trajectory of collecting cash flow, and it works actually very well for everybody.
And that leads to a perfect question. Peter Darcy, how do you look at the boroughs for office, residential, and so on?
Yeah, and we've talked a little bit about this, but I'm going to focus the answer on Brooklyn because
there are three other boroughs.
Well, I'm picking one of them.
I do shows. Well, they talk about Brooklyn. I say Bronx, Staten Island. They say what?
Well, there's just happened to be a lot of requests coming over the past 2 years from our customer base in Brooklyn. We've done a lot in residential.
I was surrounded last night by this broker saying, this owner saying, when are you going to do a building about office buildings in Brooklyn? But boutique office buildings.
Well, I think here's some interesting, if there are really two projects that I think are very interesting to look at the leasing. There's the Empire Stores development, which is the RFP down by the Carousel in Dumbo, and that's going to be a very nice high-end office building with great historical significance and bones. And then you have the Jehovah's Witness buildings that Kushner and RFR recently
don't forget Invesco.
And Invesco, yep, recently purchased. I have walked through both of these sites, and what's interesting is the brokerage community. These are new cutting-edge developments. There really isn't an established brokerage community that's prepared to lease these and has the background. It's really the future of Brooklyn, with the premise being there are a lot of people who live in Brooklyn, a lot of the creative types that want to ride their bikes potentially. They want to work in Brooklyn.
Even McMillan's going to learn what Brooklyn is one day.
He might. So the question is, can a office building, a well-located office building, get rents that might compare to some of these properties in Midtown South? If they're interesting properties, by creating a community, some interesting tenants, some interesting retail, would people almost rather be there? That's the first time I think people have taken and invested a lot of capital with that investment thesis and attracted institutional capital with that investment thesis. I think it'll be interesting. There's already some pre-leasing to some of these. It'll be interesting to watch it pan out. Also, Domino Sugar Factory has which we financed the acquisition of that site, a wonderful site, mostly residential, but as part of the ULIRP, they're looking at converting the historic building into office space. That'd be almost 500,000 square feet. So you look there, you look at some of the high-end stuff in Dumbo, and then you go further south in Sunset Park, and there's a number of large developments at a lower price point that are trying to attract and cultivate this creative class to work locally. You're talking a substantial amount of square footage, and I think it's a really fascinating development to watch.
Since relating to Brooklyn and Queens, let's ask Mr. Obaid with regard to hospitality and Mr. McMillan with regard to luxury condominiums, what your thought about the boroughs are, Brooklyn or Queens and so on. Will?
Sure.
Especially since you're opening up a hotel, or it may have opened up recently in Queens.
Yeah. That's a Crown Plaza that you're referencing. It's a 300-room Crown Plaza near the JFK airport. It's right off the Van Wyck. It used to be an old Hilton hotel built 1958 that we've converted to a Crown Plaza, and that'll be open in about 3 weeks or so. So we're very excited about that project, and we have high expectations for that hotel. Shifting to Brooklyn, I totally missed the Williamsburg opportunity in a lot of ways. People were showing me sites 5-6 years ago, And I kept asking the same thing, where are the demand drivers? I just couldn't get comfortable with the potential demand for a hotel in Williamsburg. And the answers were always the same. They said, oh, well, you know, with all these young people moving to Williamsburg, their parents and their grandparents need somewhere to stay, which I thought was a ridiculous answer, because I'm not going to build a hotel with that kind of investment thesis. Needless to say, fast forward 5-6 years, here we are. Williamsburg has become a major cultural epicenter. I think certainly in terms of businesses, photography, fashion, music, there's this whole creative class that wants to be in Williamsburg, and now that's spreading to other areas, of course, throughout Brooklyn, and they want to live, work, and play there. And I think it's really great to see. We are looking at a couple of sites right now in Brooklyn, and we hope to be part of that. I'm keeping an eye on Bushwick. I think Bushwick has some potential. The problem I'm having with Bushwick is it does feel very industrial, but I think that there could be some rezoning changes there that would continue to make that a pretty interesting market for us to watch.
Joe?
Yeah, I agree. I think there is a lot of opportunity in Brooklyn. We can talk about the other boroughs in a second. I mean, I was out in Brooklyn, spent the day there on Sunday looking at real estate. I was out by Barclays Center, went out as far as Crown Heights, actually, to just get a sense for different neighborhoods in the borough. I've been to BAM, Michael, so I have been to Brooklyn, and I think it's great. I think if you look out over the next 10 to 20 years, I think Brooklyn is going to continue to see a renaissance, unlike few things we've seen in the last 20 years. It seems like Brooklyn is a destination unto itself now. It's not just people used to think, oh, New York City was Manhattan. That's not the case anymore. As it relates to some of the other boroughs, I mean, we have looked in Long Island City, and we have not done any projects there. But Staten Island and the Bronx, we really don't know those markets.
Scott?
We have a brokerage business where we do a lot of tenant reps for some retailers because they think maybe we know a little. And one of the requests we got couple of years ago was from a tenant. We did a lot of stores in Manhattan and said, well, it's time to go to Brooklyn. So we started scouting Williamsburg and the typical places that people were going at that time. We found some difficulties in a couple of areas. One was configuration. Most of these properties are small and old, and a lot of them are owned by original non-real estate landlords, if you may, and tenant allowance is hard to come by, and deals are hard to negotiate. There's not a well-developed brokerage community in some of these places. And then the second thing is the pricing. In some places already, in Brooklyn per se, you're seeing some pricing that I don't feel and we don't feel is consistent. It's probably several years ahead of the retail growth. Retail is needs traffic drivers to ring the register, and so we are expressing some cautionary warnings towards some of these folks. In Queens, from a retail perspective, I at one point had a lot of stores in Queens 10, 20, 30 years ago, and now we're starting to see there are some areas that I believe are really going to develop. I mean, we just did a couple of deals on Austin Street for two different people. As far as Staten Island, I mean, it's a mall-centric and shopping center-centric area.